The most expensive thing an ancient human ever owned was a hole in the ground. You are standing at the edge of a vertical shaft, 43 feet deep, holding the cold, heavy hand of someone who no longer exists. Around you, the air is thick with the scent of damp earth and something much older, yet you aren't here to hide a crime or dispose of waste. You are here to invest the only wealth your tribe has, thousands of hours of survival, into a person who can never pay you back. For most of history, we believed that our ancestors viewed death as a simple mechanical failure, a broken tool to be tossed aside. But as you look down into the darkness, you realize the truth is much more haunting. We have always been obsessed with the dead. Why did we start caring when the heart stopped beating? For a long time, the history books told a very simple story. They said that complex funerals and the honoring of the dead were inventions of modern humans. The logic was that you needed a big brain, a religion, and a settled village before you could care about what happened to a corpse. Before that, we assumed our ancestors just left bodies where they fell, or perhaps dragged them into the brush to keep predators away from the camp. It was a cold, pragmatic view of the past. But that entire theory collapsed in a deep, limestone cave in the Atapuerca Mountains of northern Spain. This site is known as Cima de los Huesos, or the Pit of Bones. What researchers found there was a paradox that should not exist. Deep inside a nearly inaccessible cavern, they discovered the remains of at least 28 individuals. These weren't modern humans like us. They were Homo heidelbergensis, a species that lived about 430,000 years ago. At first, scientists like Juan Luis Arzuaga thought this might be a natural trap, a place where people accidentally fell and died over thousands of years. But the evidence didn't fit. There were no marks from carnivore teeth on the bones, and the age distribution of the people didn't look like a natural disaster. Most were young adults. Even more shocking was what was found among the bones: a single, beautifully crafted hand axe made of rare red quartzite. This tool, nicknamed Excalibur, had never been used. It was pristine. In a world where every scrap of stone was a vital survival tool, someone had carved a masterpiece and then thrown it into a pit of the dead. This wasn't a disposal site, it was a statement. These ancient people were taking a massive risk, crawling through dark, dangerous tunnels to reach this pit. They weren't just avoiding predators. They were creating a space for the departed. If death was just an end, why would they risk their lives to reach the bottom of a hole? But how do we know this wasn't just a unique, one-time fluke of history? For decades, the most famous proof of ancient compassion came from a place called Shanidar Cave in the Zagros Mountains of Iraq. In the late 1950s, an archaeologist named Ralph Seletsky discovered the remains of several Neanderthals. One of them, known as Shanidar 4, became a global sensation. When Seletsky analyzed the soil around the body, he found clusters of pollen from yarrow, cornflowers, and hollyhocks. He proposed a beautiful, revolutionary idea. Neanderthals were flower people. He argued that 60,000 years ago, a grieving family had hiked into the mountains, gathered colorful wildflowers, and gently laid them over their fallen friend. It was an image that humanized Neanderthals forever. It suggested they had a sense of beauty and a spiritual connection to the earth. It was the perfect story of ancient love. However, science has a habit of dismantling perfect stories. Years later, new researchers looked at the same data and found a much less romantic explanation. The pollen wasn't in a blanket, it was in clumps that looked exactly like the burrows of a local species of desert mole rat. These rodents are known to drag flowers into their tunnels to store as food. For a long time, the flower burial was used as a cautionary tale of how archaeologists let their emotions cloud their judgment. The myth was busted. But then in 2020, a new team led by Emma Pomeroy returned to Shanidar. They found a new skeleton, Shanidar Z, right next to the original flower burial site. They found that the body had been placed in a channel carved into the cave floor, with a large stone placed near the head like a pillow. Even without the flowers, the ritual was real. These people were returning to the same spot for generations to lay their dead in a specific, protected way. Was the mole rat just a coincidental guest at a very real funeral? This brings us to a difficult question. Why waste the effort? In the prehistoric world, survival was a razor-thin margin. Every calorie mattered. Every hour of daylight was spent searching for food or water. Yet, when we look at the site of Sungur in Russia, we see an investment of labor that defies all logic. Around 34,000 years ago, a community buried a man and 2 children. These weren't just holes in the ground. The bodies were covered in thousands of ivory beads, meticulously carved from mammoth tusks. Each single bead is estimated to have taken at least 45 minutes to an hour to produce. For the 2 children alone, there were over 10,000 beads. That represents roughly 10,000 hours of labor. If you had one person working 40 hours a week, it would take them 5 years of constant work just to decorate these 2 graves. These weren't kings or queens in the way we think of them. They were members of a small hunter-gatherer tribe. The children were buried head-to-head with long, straightened spears made of ivory, a technology so difficult it requires soaking and steaming the tusks for days. One of the children had physical deformities that would have made him a burden to a mobile tribe. In a survival of the fittest world, he should have been forgotten. Instead, he was buried with more wealth than any other human of his era. This suggests that the dead weren't just remembered, they were honored with a level of sacrifice that must have hurt the living. The tribe went hungry so the dead could look magnificent. Did they believe the beads were necessary for the next life, or were they trying to prove something to the people left behind? As we look deeper into these burials, a strange, recurring color begins to emerge from the dust. In almost every major prehistoric find, from the caves of South Africa to the plains of Europe, archaeologists find red ochre. This is a natural iron oxide, a pigment that creates a deep, blood-red stain. At the Kafsa cave in Israel, dating back 100,000 years, the dead were coated in this red powder. At Lake Mungo in Australia, a man was buried 42,000 years ago, his bones completely saturated with ochre that had been transported from dozens of miles away. This wasn't a local resource, it was a precious commodity. For a long time, we thought this was purely symbolic, representing the blood of life, or a hope for rebirth. But the reality might be more grounded in the physical struggle of death. Red ochre has unique chemical properties. It is antibacterial and can slow the process of decomposition. It also masks the scent of decaying flesh. It is possible that our ancestors' first rituals were born out of a desperate need to keep the dead near without attracting predators or disease. But over thousands of years, a practical solution turned into a sacred tradition. We see this in the Blombos Cave in South Africa, where 75,000-year-old ochre processing kits were found. They weren't just using it, they were manufacturing it with precision. They were turning a preservative into a costume for the end of time. When the practical use of the red dust faded, the symbolic power remained. If the red powder was meant to keep the body alive, what were they so afraid of losing? This leads us to a darker, more visceral form of ancient mourning that many people find difficult to accept. Sometimes, the way to honor the dead wasn't to bury them, but to keep them inside the community, literally. At Gough's Cave in Somerset, England, researchers found the remains of people from the Magdalenian culture, dating back about 14,700 years. The bones tell a gruesome story. They show clear marks of filleting, defleshing, and even human teeth marks. For a long time, this was labeled as primitive cannibalism or the result of a desperate famine. But a forensic study by Sylvia Bello of the Natural History Museum changed the narrative. The way these bodies were processed was too careful, too precise for a simple meal. The most chilling discovery at Gough's Cave was the skull cups. The hunters had carefully removed the soft tissue from human heads and then meticulously chipped away the facial bones to create perfect, symmetrical drinking vessels. This wasn't an act of war or a sign of hunger. It was an act of high ritual. In many cultures, Indo-cannibalism, the eating of one's own dead, is a way to absorb the spirit of the deceased, to ensure their wisdom and strength don't vanish from the world. By turning a skull into a cup, you aren't discarding a person, you are making them a permanent part of the tribe's most sacred moments. You are drinking from the memory of your father or your sister. It is a level of intimacy that modern humans find repulsive, yet it shows a profound refusal to let the dead go. Could a meal be the most sincere form of a funeral? This drive to preserve the dead, whether through beads, ochre, or consumption, suggests a massive shift in how the human brain works. This is what scientists call symbolic thought. It is the ability to see a body not as meat, but as a person who still exists in some other form. But when did this happen? For years, we thought it was a slow, steady climb alongside the growth of our brains. We assumed that only large-brained species like us or Neanderthals could handle the complex emotions of grief and ritual. That assumption was shattered in the Rising Star Cave system in South Africa. In 2013, a team led by Lee Berger discovered a new species, Homo naledi. These creatures had brains only about a third the size of ours, roughly the size of an orange. What the team found in the Dinaledi chamber was staggering. Over 1,500 bone fragments from at least 15 individuals were tucked away in a chamber that is incredibly difficult to reach. To get there, you have to crawl through a crack called the Superman's Crawl and climb a vertical rock wall known as the Dragon's Back. There is no evidence that these individuals lived in the cave, and there are no signs that they were dragged there by water or predators. Berger proposed a radical theory. These small-brained hominids were intentionally disposing of their dead in a protected, remote sanctuary 250,000 years ago. If he is right, it means that the urge to honor the dead doesn't require a modern brain. It might be an ancient, primal instinct that predates our species entirely. It suggests that death has been our primary teacher, forcing us to think about things we cannot see long before we had the words to describe them. But if even the primitive ones felt the weight of loss, what does that say about the nature of the soul? This brings us back to the image of the masterpiece in the pit. When we look at all these examples, the red quartzite axe in Spain, the ivory beads in Russia, the skull cups in England, and the deep chambers in South Africa, we see a pattern. Death was never a private event. It was a communal crisis. Each funeral was a way for the tribe to repair the hole left by the deceased. By investing time, labor, and beauty into a corpse, they were convincing themselves that the person still mattered. They were building a bridge between the world of the living and the silence of the past. They were the first people to realize that while a body can break, a story can be made permanent. But we have to be careful not to project too much of our own modern sentimentality onto the past. We don't know if they believed in a heaven or a hell. We don't know if they were afraid of ghosts or if they were simply trying to say goodbye. The graves aren't a map of their religion, they are a map of their effort. The sheer amount of work required for these ancient funerals is the most honest evidence we have. You don't carve 10,000 beads for a child unless that child's existence was a central pillar of your world. You don't risk your life in a dark cave to deposit a hand axe unless you believe that the act of giving matters more than the tool itself. The myth that ancient humans were cold and animalistic is dead. The reality is that they were probably more attuned to the weight of death than we are today. In our modern world, we hide death behind hospital curtains and professional funeral directors. We make it clean, quiet, and invisible. Our ancestors did the opposite. They touched the dead. They painted them. They carved for them. They even ate them. They lived in a constant, vibrating dialogue with the people who had gone before. They understood that a community isn't just made of the people who are breathing right now, it's made of everyone who ever contributed to the fire. If we stopped remembering, would the fire go out? When we look at the Kafsa 11 burial, a young teenager buried with the antlers of a red deer placed directly over their chest, we see the beginning of something that still haunts us today. It's a gesture of protection. Even in death, the living wanted to give the dead a weapon or a tool. It is a heartbreakingly human impulse. It is the realization that we are the only species that knows, with absolute certainty, that we are going to die. And instead of letting that knowledge crush us, we used it to create art, technology, and society. We built our civilization on the foundations of our graveyards. We are the species that refuses to accept an ending. Think about the first person who decided to dig a grave. Before that moment, death was just a smell and a disappearance. But once that hole was dug, death became a location. It became a place where you could return. You could talk to the earth and feel like someone was listening. That single act of digging changed the human map forever. It created the concept of home as a place that belongs to both the living and the ancestors. We didn't start building cities because we wanted to live together. We started building them because we didn't want to leave our dead behind. The cemetery is the mother of the city. Does that mean our entire world is just an elaborate way of staying close to the people we've lost? As you imagine that ancient person standing at the edge of the pit in Attapurca, you see the true cost of being human. It isn't found in the things we build to stay alive. It's found in the things we build for those who are already gone. Those 28 people in the pit of bones were not a pile of trash. They were a library of memories, guarded by a red stone axe. They were the first proof that we had decided that a human life is worth more than the meat on its bones. We decided that even when the light goes out, the person is still there, somewhere in the dark, waiting for us to bring them a gift. Archaeology can show us the beads and the ochre, but it can't show us the tears. It can't show us the songs they sang or the way their voices shook in the dark of the cave. But we don't need to see those things to know they happened. The evidence is in the effort. The evidence is in the 10,000 hours of ivory carving. The evidence is in the Excalibur axe, gleaming red in the torchlight before it fell into the abyss. We have always been a species that loves too much for our own good. We have always been a species that tries to bargain with the inevitable. And in that bargain, we found our soul. So, what did ancient humans do when someone died? They did exactly what we do. They looked at the empty space where a person used to be, and they tried to fill it with something beautiful. They fought against the silence with everything they had. They turned the most terrifying fact of existence into a reason to create. They realized that the only way to survive death is to make sure it is never forgotten. Is it possible that the dead are the ones who truly taught us how to be alive? If you ever find yourself walking through an ancient museum or standing near an old burial mound, remember that you aren't looking at a primitive past. You are looking at the foundation of your own heart. Every ritual we have today, from the flowers at a funeral to the monuments in our parks, is just a whisper of those first desperate acts in the caves of Spain and Africa. We are still that same creature, standing at the edge of the dark, holding a red stone and hoping it's enough. We are still trying to pay a debt to the people who made us. The dead are gone, but they have never left us. This journey into the pits of the past reminds us that the most human thing about us isn't our technology or our cities. It's our refusal to let the people we love disappear. We have spent 500,000 years trying to prove that death isn't the last word. We have carved, painted, and prayed our way through the millennia, all to keep a single flame burning in the dark. Our ancestors didn't just bury bodies, they buried seeds of culture that are still blooming today. In every grave, there is a story about what it means to be a part of something bigger than yourself. Which of these ancient traditions do you find the most moving? Is it the massive sacrifice of labor at Sungur, or the intimate, terrifying skull cups of Goff's cave? Perhaps you see a bit of yourself in the flower people of Shanidar, even if the bees were the ones who brought the blossoms. Death is the one thing we all have in common, yet we all face it so differently. If you want to keep exploring the hidden corners of our human story and the mysteries that define us, consider sticking around. There are many more layers to peel back from the earth. The next time you see a hand axe or a simple stone tool in a display case, look closer at the edges. Think about the hands that held it and the moment they decided to let it go. We are the only animals that give gifts to the ground. We are the only ones who see a masterpiece in a corpse. We are the only ones who look at a cold, empty hole and see a future. The truth is, we have never been good at saying goodbye. We have always preferred to build a monument instead. We are the species that lives in the shadow of its ancestors, and we wouldn't have it any other way. Everything you are today is a gift from someone who is now just dust and a few ivory beads. They worked, they suffered, and they died so that the story could continue. They left you their tools, their red ochre, and their stubborn refusal to be forgotten. You are the living proof of their success. You are the masterpiece they left behind. The dead do not speak, but they have left us a very clear message written in the soil. They told us that we are worth the effort. They told us that even in the deepest pit, there is a place for beauty. And as you walk away from the edge of that ancient shaft, you realize that the debt can never be fully repaid. You are simply the next one in line to hold the red stone. When you look into the abyss, remember that the abyss is crowded with your family. They are waiting in the silence, dressed in ivory and stained with red. They aren't just bones, they are the architects of your soul. Every step you take is on ground they prepared for you. Every breath you take is a legacy they fought to preserve. We are a haunted species, and that is our greatest strength. We carry the dead with us, and in return, they give us a world that matters. The most expensive thing an ancient human ever owned was a hole in the ground, and they bought it for you. The dead are never truly buried. We just keep them under our feet to make sure we're standing on something solid.